Hello, and welcome to this unscripted conversation between me and Greg Hackett, the founder and event director of the London Mountain Film Festival. In this conversation, we explore how London Mountain Film Festival became what I believe is a very robust prototype of what I like to call the Starling event model. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Let's start with a big question for you. When you started London Mountain Film Festival, just explain the environment that you started it and what you were trying to do.
Sure. Well, I've attended other similar events as a bona fide attendee, and there are two models. There's a festival model, which is normally a large event where people come from miles around to a national park and watch films and listen to talks. And then there's the tour of that, which is where people go around the country and show films in cinemas afterwards. So I've been to both of those. And when I was in one of the tour events in London by one of my, I suppose, competitors, I was sitting there thinking, why am I watching films that are provided by a festival that ran in another country? Why can't we have our own festival here in London? So the original genesis of the idea, I suppose, was to think, well, we're in a city, but that doesn't mean that people aren't into adventure. It doesn't mean they go climbing. It doesn't mean they're not into outdoor sports. In fact, there's more of us, and we're more frustrated because we can't get to that stuff on a daily basis. So the idea was to run a festival that's like one of those national park mountain festivals, but to run it in London, essentially as they have done it, but within the constraints of an urban environment.
Okay, then what happened?
I started to run one, and I booked a very appropriate venue, the Royal Geographical Society, because I wanted to, show off, I suppose, one of the great features of London adventure. And I booked that place, and I put a program together. I invested about a year's worth of time, and then there was a thing called a pandemic. So that project was immediately derailed. It was meant to be in May 2020. And at that time, like everybody else, I suppose I was looking around for ways that I could salvage something from the wreckage of that launch event. And like everybody else, I suppose I turned to digital. And my immediate reaction was because I had all the films and I'd grown a database by then of people who wanted to come. So my immediate reaction was just to put those films that I had online and make them available over a weekend and call it a festival, and make it free because of the circumstances. I didn't want to rip people off. I thought they were stuck at home. I thought it'd be good escapism for everyone. And so I just ran this thing. And of course, we had about 15,000 people that watched it. And we're very grateful for the fact that I put it on and enjoyed the films. And that's it in a way. I was kind of up and running because of that. Although at this point, I still wasn't making any money. Following, and I had the beginnings of an idea.
And then let's talk a little bit about the digital journey, because you're someone who, like a lot of us in events, we have grown up in the physical narrative, right? It's what I call the attention by default world, right? Once everybody's there, the job's done. In the digital world, it's very different. People can leave very quickly. What were some of the biggest things that kind of I don't know what the right word is, that where you kind of went, oh my God, I need to rethink how I look at this and how I approach it, and those very early lessons from that first festival. Because I suppose what I'm saying is, like, needing a pandemic to sustain a business model is a bad idea. So everybody's locked at home, and then people were watching it because they were bored stupid. But what did you learn out of it?
Well, I suppose it's what I unlearned out of it, isn't it? I think because, like you say, I'm a 30 or something years in the physical industry, where you wake up every day worrying about sponsorship, worrying about venues and daily delegate rates, worrying about pricing, worrying about all those levers that you need to pull to make a physical event work. And you don't just understand those things; they're kind of written into your core after a while. You live and breathe that existence of the physical event. And I think that's why when physical event people sit down and look at digital, they can't let go, I think, of those ingrained beliefs in the the main levers of their business. So they try to overlay digital upon it. And I think that's looking down the wrong end of the telescope, you know. So I think you actually put the telescope down and pick it up and look through it from the point of view of the customer, or the point of view of somebody who doesn't know anything about physical events, you get a very different picture. And I think the thing about the pandemic was it didn't get me there. It wasn't enough in itself to get me there, but it did remove some of those things that I would automatically prioritize, and I no longer prioritized those things, you know. And I wasn't thinking so much about how to make money, whether I get a sponsor. I was just thinking inside about what can I do for these people to engage with them digitally while this is going on. And I think removing those barriers was a huge step forward. It wasn't the end of the journey, and we'll talk about it in a minute, but it was a huge, it was definitely a catalyst. But even, I mean, moving forward, I mean, even after that, I was still struck, I was still held back by some of that thinking. And I started to investigate. I started to think, okay, you know, what else can I do with these people? And I started looking at things like the club, you know, the weekly digital experience and showing films, which is very much a physical. And I think that's very much come out of the physical event stable. Because if you run a big annual event, you worry about what people are doing for the rest of the year. So you try and invent content for them that keeps them engaged for the rest of the year. But it's kind of a sticking plaster, and you know, I've never really seen one that's worked particularly well. I'm sure there are some out there. I think if you put the club at the forefront, then that might be a different thing. But if it's an add-on, so I was kind of looking at that as an add-on. I was looking at, I think what I was doing, Adam, actually was I was looking for ideas in digital that would keep me afloat until such time as I could run a physical event again and then revert to type.
That's the thing, right? It's like, you know, I find it so interesting when you feel yourself going on a journey by accident or design or whatever it is, but you know you're on that journey. It's that what I call like a crab in a pot mentality, right? You're trying to climb out of this bucket, but there's always something that pulls you back, and there's always that snapback moment where you're like, actually, you know what? If I was running a live event, I could get 150 grand worth of sponsorship, blah, 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 and life would be great, right? And wouldn't it just be? But it's because you do that because that's what you know. That's what 30 years of experience has taught you. So how did you navigate through that kind of snapback moment and not snap back? And where did you go?
I snapped back, but then the experience of the physical event was unfulfilling, I suppose is the way to put it. You know, when we came out and I could run physical events, I stuck an event on in town, got a major release and filled a room with people. I mean, that event was a real success. Some of the other bits around it were less successful. So, but I sort of woke up the next morning thinking, you know, I'm just going in the wrong direction here, and I'm trying to leave behind all that stuff that I started. And as you say, I think snapping back's a really good way of putting it. So I did snap back. I had that initial event, and I thought, actually, you know what? This is a bit dull because it's what I did before, and also it's what to go back to the original idea of the event. You know, it's what my competitors, I suppose, are already doing. It's kind of what's already available. I'm trying to muscle in an urban environment, but apart from that, it's not particularly sexy. I still wasn't getting any interest from sponsors because this is a cash-strapped market. You know, there's not a lot of money floating around. So having had those various experiences, then I actually talking to someone that I know, and she said, and this is just before I started sharing the idea with other people, including yourself. But she said, "Why? You know, you just think about it the wrong way. Stop thinking about how you're going to make money. Start thinking about how you're going to enjoy yourself." Yeah. And that was a real eye, because once I committed to that, I actually did start to enjoy myself. And then these other ideas began to come out, and I started to talk to other people. You were one of the people I had a conversation with, which was very, very important. And then I did have the germ of an idea, and then between us, you know, we've sort of grown that into something which I think is more interesting than the original objective. You know, nobody's doing it, and it achieves everything that these bigger events achieve in terms of giving people a physical experience, apart from a large crowd. But as you know, a large crowd isn't great for the environment. It's not a great idea to have people traveling across the country to gather in one place. And so what this does is it says, actually, we'll come to you, we'll talk about the model if you want to talk about the model. Or it sort of reverses that idea. It says, actually, we're gonna come and find you, and we're gonna give you what you want on your doorstep. It's not gonna cost you very much. You'll have a great time. You'll raise some money for your good cause, and you don't have to travel across the country and contribute to air pollution and climate change.
It's interesting you say that, because when we started working together, I remember spending quite a bit of time challenging you about going, "Hey, hang on a minute, why would you want to do this? And what's going on?" But what was interesting is, like, we always had that anchor, which you said right at the beginning. I want to do this because I want to enable more people to connect with adventure, and I'm doing that through film. And we always ended up going back to that, and we go, "Hang on a minute, is this idea in line with that outcome, yes or no?" And we'll go on to the model in a bit, but talk to me about that moment, which I think for all of us was a bit of an aha moment, when you got one of your community reached out and said, "Hey, can I do this?" And it was like somewhere in rural Kentucky or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, I found out in my life that all my best ideas are had by somebody else, So, so so the film festival was available online, in the same way that Netflix is available online. You just sort of plug in and watch it. And then I got an email one day from it was one of my filmmakers actually who had entered the festival. He said, is it okay if I screen a few of these films to my community? And they're in a small mountain rural community in the mountains of Kentucky. And I sort of said, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Crack on. What a great idea. And then he did it, and he sent me photographs, and they're all sat around watching my films my filmmakers' films, I should say, in this mountain hut in the middle of nowhere. And I just thought, well, that's just brilliant, isn't it? And then I think even then, it took me another cup of coffee before I had the idea,
Right.
Come on a minute, we could have hundreds of people doing that. And he's in Kentucky, and I'm in London, and he's watching films. I've collected films from all across the world, selected the ones that I think are the most suitable for my festival, the best ones. And there's a guy in Kentucky sharing that curation, or his narrowed down curation of those films to his colleagues. And I just thought that was a wonderful moment. And the other thing that happened was that some of the filmmakers who were being watched in Kentucky by him were just blown away by this. They couldn't believe that their films were being shown in a mountain hut in Kentucky. They absolutely loved it. So I just sort of recognized the joy when I saw it. I thought, oh my God, everyone here is loving this. I'm loving it because I don't have to take the risk and the stress and the hassle of hiring a massive venue and trying to get 20,000 people to turn up in London or from London. I don't have that stress, which, might make me money, but isn't a lot of fun a lot of the time. I've got a guy in Kentucky who's having a brilliant time with his friends, and I got a filmmaker who's like bowled over that their film has reached right into the depths of and the heart and soul of another community in a part of the world where they'll never even go, And that was a real moment. And I thought, you know what? If I push that, if there's more people out there like him who want to do this, then we could be onto something. And that is the complete reversal of where I started. I started from let's bring as many people as I can to one place and do it my way, and ended up in saying, well, let's just send out the films to as many people as want to see them, and they can do it their way, where they are. And it's empowering. It's like setting it free. It's kind of like it felt, I think you said at the time, you said this feels like a movement almost, we're totally changing the model. We're giving people access to things that they wouldn't be able to otherwise get. It's not expensive. We can change their life. We can inspire them, and everybody's a winner. And it just felt to me that actually that's something that will bring me a lot of personal and job satisfaction, much more so than knocking out an event that looks a bit like all the other events I've been doing for the last 30 years, and the ones that other people are already doing. Who wants to do that?
Because I remember when, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when you and I went on a tour of all these community events, because that was really cool, just to sit in the back and observe and how that happened, how it all came together. And I've kind of called your model the starling because I was watching a murmuring of starlings, and I love how they just coalesce and then they dissipate, and that's the community events. But I'm interviewing you, and it's not the other way around. So talk a little bit about how, you know, we got from that sort of aha moment with that happening in Kentucky to then what we did last year, which I kind of call, and I remember saying it to you about it. I mean, and most people in the events world hate the term MVP, but I kind of said we got to test the appetite for this. One person is doing it. Is there an appetite? So that
Yeah.
just talk through some of the unlearnings you had to do in that when we were getting to that, what happened, where we are.
Yeah,
I think one of your big ones was that you suddenly realized that you don't need a 3-month lead time to get a bunch of people together.
first thing was we came a bit late. I mean,
Yeah.
that next event I was kind of thinking, oh, we come again, But then, what's the best way to explain this? I think that guy's event in Kentucky was almost like an initial prototype, wasn't it?
Mm.
I think when you're in the pharmaceutical industry, they have a thing called scale up, which is an intermediary between prototype and mass production. There's a bit in the middle where they start to produce a lot more of drugs so they can do the clinical trials. So it's not a perfected production system, and it is a test, and it gives you the opportunity to test. They're committed. We were committed to that idea. We both believed in it, didn't we? We were committed to the idea. We wanted to scale it up, but we didn't want to put the house on it just yet. We wanted to see if there was a wider appetite. So we did slightly modify what was available online. We created forms for people to apply to do it, and we created windows for them to see the films before, because they need to watch the films before the festival starts. They can pick the ones they want to show, and all. We created all these fixes using the constraints of a bespoke platform, web.
Yeah, we hacked at some code and stuff like that, and it was good enough, right?
Yeah, it was good enough. It was a light touch. You helped me out with coding because I don't understand any of that stuff. I was getting the films together. We did pivot our marketing quite significantly towards that, and that's something that you encouraged me to do, and I'm glad you did, because I think if you are going to test something like that, you can't half test it. You have to fully test it. If you decide this is the future of the event, because I was at the point, right, where I was thinking, well, it's either this, I'm going to not bother with this event anymore, because I don't want to do the physical event, and the digital event as it was a bit dull. So if this doesn't work, I don't know, maybe I'll go off and be a postman or something. So we did commit to it in that sense, in the sense that we believed it was the future of the event. If the event had a future, this was it. I think I'll put it that way. But I didn't want to spend $50,000 on it or something. So we tweaked it. We did some coding, and we started to market it and say to people, guys, you just in your place, your club. It's really easy to do. Bearing in mind, a lot of these people are already customers of mine, so they've seen the films online. There would have been some trust. There would have been some engagement. They knew that the technology worked and all that. What they didn't know is, oh, okay, so I can actually show them in my village hall. I could do what the guy in Kentucky did. So that's what we did. I think we said, didn't we, at the time, if we get a dozen of these from this really low, no offense to your coding, but low tech. And
no. I mean, our bar was at 10, right? And this is another point that we discussed. What I was saying to you is like to test something, you don't have to overcode it. You don't have to go and buy another platform. If you know what you're doing, you can probably prototype enough of it to validate the idea and validate the experience. And there was a bunch of stuff that we had to do in the background. But our bar was 10, and what did you end up with? More than that, right?
With 20, so we had 20 events. But it doesn't stop there, because, and again, just to go back to the physical event, and this might be being a bit unfair to some event organisers, but a lot of the time, those events are measured in numbers and quantities and margin and all that stuff. But we measured ours in fun, I think. I mean, it was great to have those 20 events. But what you made me do two things, actually, which were very pivotal. One was to run my own mini festival. I did that in a pub up the road. And then the other thing you made us do Well, I need to be persuaded that difficult because it was in a brewery. Is you took me, we went to see somebody else's event in London, like you said, we went on a bit of a tour. And that for me was the real thing that clinched it. You know, of course we got we bust our target in terms of getting people to run these events, but really, if I'd run 20 events and they were all boring, I would have given up. But really, they were really fun. You know, the one that I ran, it was really fun to run it. People had a brilliant time. They were just blown away by it. And we got people who wouldn't normally go to a mountain festival, because they wouldn't normally travel around to, you know, across the country or down to a theatre in town even, because it was down the road from where they live, in a local pub. They were coming along, and these people going, oh, I'm booking a holiday to Canada after that, you know. So so there was that engagement. And then the one that was me running one. And then the one that stands out for me that we went to over in Hackney, where we sat, like you say, we sat at the back of the room and had a beer and watched. There must have been about 50 sort of running enthusiasts there. They chose lots of films about running. And it was wonderful being there. I felt like a ghost at the back of the room, or a parent almost, just watching these people having this brilliant time that they themselves had made. And I'd somehow had a part in that, but I was in the shadows, you know, I was in the shadows at the back of the room. But it was a wonderful feeling. It was like, you know, I didn't want to be on stage. I didn't want to do anything like that. I just wanted to watch people having a good time. It was a bit voyeuristic, actually, you know, but you know, and I just thought, this is great, you know, it could be, you know, and I really hope, we'll see how it goes. But I like your Starling metaphor, the idea of the murmuration, because it's a shape, but it's also shapeless and shape-shifting. And this idea that all across the world, every year there'll be, well, all across the world eventually, certainly in Britain to begin with, there'll be all these different events happening.
But we had one in, was it in Kenya or something like that?
Yeah, the Mountaineering Club of Kenya hosted an event. I think they did 2 nights actually in a theatre in Kenya to raise money for the Mount Kenya Trust, and they sent me photographs of that. Great, you know, they raise a few £100 for a cause that's very, very aligned with what we're all about, really. You know, looking after mountains, looking after the environment. So people,
and that to me is the other amazing thing about when you go into, I mean, to put a formal name on it, what we were doing is design thinking. We were like going, okay, hey, we want to connect people like this. We want to unlearn the way we've been taught to connect people, which is like get people to a big hall and that's how you do it. Like, how do you create it? And then I remember you and I spent a long time. I was like, well, what's the value exchange? Why would they do it? You know, why would they pay you to do this? And then we got to this point. It was like, actually, we can enable these communities to fundraise in an innovative way that they wouldn't be able to do themselves, right? And that's such a cool part. And you've got the Keynesian Club and all these clubs who just come together.
I think
it's a way of measuring the event success, right? Is where I'm going to.
Well, just I'll come back to that. You said, I just want to make this point really, that I think the issue I have come to have with the physical events industry is that it's really, I think, based on this idea of control. You know, you control your event, everything's controlled. You control your sponsors, you have your gangways, your seats, everything is as you design it. And then within that, the delegates or the sponsors have a certain amount of freedom, but really you're in control. And I think that event organizers are obsessed with control. It's a bit like an endoskeleton, you know, those sort of creatures with a skeleton on the outside that holds everything in. Whereas I think this event idea is like an exoskeleton. You know, skeletons on the inside, we got these films, but how it grows outside of that is entirely up to whoever's engaging with it. And I think we're selling freedom. I mean, that sounds a bit extreme, but I think you're saying to people, you know, watch out and do it how you like. You know, I'm not going to insist that anybody has branding at their event. I mean, it'd be nice if they did. It would be pretty hard to do it without saying it was a, but I don't mind what people do, as long as they're raising money for a good cause and they're enjoying themselves. And I think to go back to that original lesson that somebody gave me, you know, I think you've got to keep thinking about that. How do I enjoy myself? How do they enjoy themselves? And the way that people enjoy themselves is having the freedom to do things the way they want to do them. if they want advice or help, they can come to me and I'll give it. But really, you're giving people freedom to do their own thing, and the reason that works in my market is because that's what adventure is. It's the freedom to do your own thing. So they're actually, it really plays to their soul. You know, it really plays to the sort of people that they are, and I think that's why it's worked. You actually asked me a question about measurement. Sorry, I went off on.
No, it's absolutely fine. I think we made the point, right? The way we're measuring is it's about, yes, there is some empirical measure about how many community events do we create and how do we get more of those. But the real measure is, what is their radial effect? What do each of these community events enable within their community? Do they fundraise? I enjoy is a very hard thing to measure, but do they create moments in time where people experience something different? But one point that I do want to get back to, because I'm interviewing you and I'm trying to do this digitizing events thing. I remember that when we started collaborating, I spent a long time ramming it home to you that stop thinking about the tech.
Yeah.
Because what you were doing, I felt anyway, is you were immediately trying to solutionize the tech, and I was like going, forget about that. You've got to figure out the problem you're trying to solve, and tech can do anything. And I felt you were somewhat reverting to what I call like a type way. Maybe this is one of my frustrations, like, oh, can I have some tech because the tech will solve the problem? No, that's not the problem, right? So can you just talk a little bit about how you had to just reset your relationship with tech? Because I remember I kept saying to you, said, stop worrying about it. And you're like, but how will it work? And stop worrying about it. And that got us faster, I believe, to the core of the idea, right?
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think there's a couple of reasons that would explain that behaviour. I think one of the, it is about wanting to control it again. And having been a manager in event industries, and the idea that when people start to introduce tech, the first question you ask is, well, why? It sounds expensive. Can you get a, and all those questions, and you start to immediately worry about it, and you immediately lose sight of the reason that you're doing it. And I think that is a problem. I think so. Coming from the event industry was a problem. It might also be a feature of the fact that I'm a one-man band. So this first phase that I went through where I was doing the online event, I was doing that on my own. I had to create an online event myself. I can promise you, I am not a techie. And 2 minutes before the event went live, I was absolutely terrified. So I think that physical events, maybe they do have, certainly with my age, maybe have a little bit of a fear about tech, that it's not going to work. It's not really what physical events are about, and what is it? And here it comes, and oh God, do we have to, and all that stuff. But you're right. And so I immediately see it as you almost see it as an opportunity and a threat at the same time. And I think having somebody else there, having you there to say, listen, don't think about that. Because you're interested in learning, you're coming from the other way, actually. You're interested in learning more, because you didn't know my market at all, I don't think. You're interested in learning more about what do people like and what do they want and do this stuff and where will they go. And, you weren't asking me questions about tech at all. And that led me away from the tech bit. And I was able to just focus on that. And that's when we really got into the spirit. It's about the spirit, isn't it? The spirit of what we're trying to do. And the tech, small capital T, came afterwards, didn't it? It was more about we'll just figure out how to make the tech work for that, rather than what I'd done before in previous lives, but also in my platform, which is, here's the tech, what do you want to do with it? It was more, what do you want to do? Let's find the tech. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that, but it's really hard to see that when you've been, in inverted commas, brought up a certain way.
I probably think that's a fantastic full stop.
Okay. Good. All right. Well, I enjoyed a chat. Thank you very much.